This is Melissa, and today is the 15th of October, 2023. And I want to thank those of you who support what I'm doing, because I am brought to you by you and will be. So support the website. If you like the videos that I am putting up on YouTube and BitChute and Rumble and Odyssey, then give them a thumbs up and share them, and you can also subscribe via Stripe, and I appreciate that. And so that's that. I received an email from someone this week who mentioned a timely talk from Alan. And I was thankful for the heads up on it, because Alan put out thousands of talks. It's really nice when somebody says, oh, hey, this is a great talk. And it turned out that this talk that Alan did on Republic Broadcasting Network on January the 28th, 2009 is indeed timely. It's entitled, One Ring to Bind Them All. And the poem that goes along with that. For those who live in the now, life's a constant mystery. For that which happens in the now has to do with history. While unplanned life guarantees crisis along its ramble, a powerful elite took the world, smashed it on an anvil. No generation has had peace because of machinations. This group has sworn to overthrow sovereignty of nations. They stir up and arm peoples, offering solutions civic or on the field of bloody revolutions, circles within circles, wheels within wheels, dancing with the devil who makes perfidious deals. When the guns all fall silent and they ring the old peace bell, will be altered, chipped, monitored in their utopian hell. So it's an excellent talk. It is timely, and Alan reads from The Anglo-American Establishment by Carl Quigley, and he gives many good insights and points about the Balfour Declaration, setting up an Ulster in the Middle East, and who some of these players are. I thought that I would actually just read you the Balfour Declaration, because Alan has mentioned it many, many times, and it's quite brief, it's quite short. So here it is. From the Foreign Office, that's the UK, British government, from the Foreign Office, November the 2nd, 1917. Dear Lord Rothschild, I have much pleasure in conveying to you, on behalf of His Majesty's government, the following declaration of sympathy with Jewish Zionist aspirations, which has been submitted to and approved by the Cabinet. His Majesty's government view with favor the establishment in Palestine of a national home for the Jewish people, and will use their best endeavors to facilitate the achievement of this object, it being clearly understood that nothing shall be done which may prejudice the civil and religious rights of existing non-Jewish communities in Palestine, or the rights and political status enjoyed by Jews in any other country. I should be grateful if you would bring this declaration to the knowledge of the Zionist Federation. And that is signed by Arthur James Balfour. The authors, that is, who contributed to the wording of this, are Walter Rothschild, Arthur Balfour, Leo Amory, and Lord Milner, who is not listed as an author, but who was key to the shaping and the wording of this, was Chaim Weizmann, who was a Russian-born Zionist. Palestine, which at that time was 90% Christian and Muslim. I'm not sure how that broke down, what percentage were Christians and what percentage were Muslims, but Palestine is, of course, a land that goes back a long time in history and has been considered the Holy Land for all of the Abrahamic religions, those religions that come from Abraham: Christianity, Islam, Judaism. I mentioned earlier this week that it was important to be able to kind of wrap your head around the history of religions in order to understand what is going on there. And I mentioned specifically dispensationalism and the Scofield Bible. And dispensationalism, something that takes the Bible literally, ties in several things which you can look up for yourself: premillennialism. But these are key concepts in understanding. I think they're key concepts in understanding what's going on in the Middle East. Because what predated dispensationalism is something called supersessionism. I mentioned covenant theology, but supersessionism is a good starting point. And this idea, this theology, was that Christianity replaced the old covenant. It was a new covenant. Therefore, Israel was no longer to be considered a place and a people in that place. It was a new Israel. The new Israel was spiritual Israel. And for the history of Christianity, the Roman Catholics, the Eastern Orthodox, Russian Orthodox, the Protestants, they all had a fairly uniform understanding that the new covenant superseded the old covenant. Christians were now viewed as the chosen people spiritually. So there's that. Then came the idea of dispensationalism, interpreting the Bible as literal and things yet to come. And then you've got the Scofield Bible, and this is important because it reversed hundreds and hundreds of years of Christian thinking about salvation, grace, works, and replaced it with something that is going to happen in the future when the nation of Israel is restored to its land. That is basically a crude summation of dispensationalism. And I think it's safe to say that you're not going to understand, none of us can understand what's happening there if we don't read some of those dusty old books like Quigley's Tragedy and Hope in the Anglo-American Establishment. These are really key to understanding that situation that is going on there. In more recent history and how peoples are used, you have Ronald Reagan and the moral majority and the evangelicals that were responsible for bringing him into being, and he was guided philosophically, you might say, by Jeane Kirkpatrick, a neocon who loved authoritarian regimes, was a staunch supporter of Israel. And there's an irony there because she wrote about basically the U.S. no longer having its role as what you might say the policeman of the world, that it was to be, that she saw a multipolar world coming into view. And yet, at the end of Reagan's time in office, he had expanded the U.S. military by the number that I see, the amount that I see is 43% more than it was at the height of the Vietnam War. And then you also have his Star Wars that he set into motion. So, war. And Ronald Reagan also famously was on record speaking about Gog and Magog. These are Revelation, end time prophetic things that you will find in the Bible. Russia served this role for him. And then along comes George W. Bush, who claimed to be born again. Born again into what? I'm not sure. But it has been said that the evangelicals were responsible for more than 40% of the vote for him. That he simply would not have gotten into office without the vote of, in particular, the Southern Baptists. And again, you're talking about something that is a more literal interpretation of end-time prophecy. And George Bush, George W., famously talked about Gog and Magog. You can look that up for yourself. In regards to 9/11, he brought into, I said you can look that up for yourself, but I'm going to read a little bit from an article that came out in The Guardian in 2009, Bush, Gog, and Magog. Just when you thought it couldn't get crazier, a well-sourced story claims Bush invaded Iraq because of Bible prophecies. Here's a story we should all be ashamed of missing. George W. Bush attempted to sell the invasion of Iraq to Jacques Chirac using biblical prophecy. In the winter of 2003, when George Bush and Tony Blair were frantically gathering support for their planned invasion, Professor Thomas Romer, an Old Testament expert at the University of Lausanne, was rung up by the Protestant Federation of France. They asked him to supply them with a summary of the legends surrounding Gog and Magog, and as the conversation progressed, he realized that this had originally come from the highest reaches of the French government. President Jacques Chirac wanted to know what the hell President Bush had been on about in their last conversation. Bush had then said that when he looked at the Middle East, he saw Gog and Magog at work, and the biblical prophecies unfolding. But who the hell were Gog and Magog? Neither Chirac nor his office had any idea. But they knew Bush was an evangelical Christian, so they asked the French Federation of Protestants, who in turn asked Professor Romer. He explained that Gog and Magog were, to use theological jargon, crazy talk. They appeared twice in the Old Testament, once as a name and once in a truly strange prophecy in the book of Ezekiel. And the word of the Lord came unto me, saying, Son of man, set thy face against Gog, the land of Magog, the chief prince of Meshech and Tubal, and the prophecy against him, and say, Thus saith the Lord God, Behold, I am against thee, O Gog, the chief prince of Meshech and Tubal, and I will turn thee back and put hooks into thy jaws, and I will bring thee forth and all thine army, horses and horsemen, all of them clothed with all sorts of armor, even a great company with bucklers and shields, all of them handling swords. Persia, Ethiopia, and Libya with them, all of them with shield and helmet, Gomer and all his bands, the house of Togarmah of the north quarters, and all his bands, and many people with thee. Who are all these people? The best opinion is that, like all Bible prophecy, it is a mixture of wish fulfillment and contemporary Iron Age politics. Some of it at least seems to refer to the turmoil brought about by Alexander the Great in the 4th century BC. Unlike Bush, Alexander actually conquered Afghanistan. But they have been, for the last 200 years, the subject of increasingly excited evangelical fanfic. especially in America in the 70s and 80s, Gog was meant to be Russia. Ronald Reagan seems to have believed that. But with Reagan, the prophecy appreciation part of his brain functioned quite independently of the part that started wars. There's nothing in the Old Testament about Nicaragua or even Grenada. Bush seems to have taken the threat of Gog and Magog to Israel, quite literally, and if this story can be believed, to have launched a war to stop them. Can it be believed? We have calls out to Professor Romer and to the Protestant Federation of France. I'll report back if or when they get back to us. But the Romer story was published in the Lausanne University magazine in 2007 and looks perfectly credible there. It was repeated independently in a French book of interviews with Chirac this spring. I'm certainly inclined to believe it myself. It makes as much sense as anything else about Bush's policy in Iraq. There is one last twist to the story. The prophecy concludes in a way that should make even George W. Bush flinch, having set his hooks in Gog, Magog, Mesech, Tubal, Old Gomer, Togarmah, and all, and dragged them to attack Israel. What does God do to defend his chosen people? First, he gets mad. My fury shall come up in my face. And then he gets even. For in my jealousy and in the fire of my wrath have I spoken. Surely in that day there shall be a great shaking in the land of Israel, so that the fishes of the sea and the fowls of the heaven and the beasts of the field and all creeping things that creep upon the earth and all the men that are upon the face of the earth shall shake at my presence, and the mountains shall be thrown down, and the steep places shall fall, and every wall shall fall to the ground. And I will call for a sword against him throughout all my mountains, saith the Lord God. Every man's sword shall be against his brother, and I will plead against him with pestilence and with blood, and I will rain upon him and upon his bands and upon the many people that are with him, an overflowing rain, and great hailstones, fire and brimstone. Is that really what a true defender of Israel would wish to happen there? If there was anyone who suffered such things as a result of Bush's war, it was the poor Iraqis. Tricky stuff, the word of the Lord. And that is the end of the Guardian article. But it isn't the end of the story, because as Alan points out in this talk, he references a clip that he was going to put up that he did, where Brzezinski was exhorting the Arabs that their cause was righteous in Afghanistan. Their cause was righteous. They were doing the work of God. And Alan pointed out that specific writings have been pulled out of the Quran to basically militarize people, to use them. And the same thing can be said of Judaism, particularly in regards to Israel. Zionism is different than Judaism, but at this point they are so beautifully enmeshed in that region that it's kind of hard to pull it apart unless you are willing to read the history of the British involvement. You know, a lot of people don't really realize that at World War I, war was declared on the Ottoman Empire, that troops were sent over to fight the Turks. So you think of World War I as being fought in Europe, but there's a whole other agenda that was going on. And part of that had to do with the Balfour Declaration and setting aside a place in the Middle East that they knew would be problematic. And that history is sad and it's fascinating because the Zionists were never content and the Arabs were never content with the solutions that the British proposed. Remember that it was under British rule until after World War II when Israel was declared its own nation. its own state in 1948. So it's a long, amazing history, and you see terror attacks. One terror attack that was orchestrated by Irgun, and that it was a Zionist terrorist organization, was the bombing of the King David Hotel, which was made to look like it was done by Palestinians, but this was done by the Zionist terrorist group. And when you get into this history, you see assassinations, you see infighting, you see people that are not a unified front. I mean, one interesting thing right now is that, remember, the people of Israel have not been happy with Netanyahu. Do you remember all of those protests that have been going on in the last year? So who benefits? And then you have an interesting connection to the bombing of the King David Hotel when you look at the Emanuel brothers. That's Rahm Emanuel of Chicago, who was with Obama. Ari Emanuel is a head of a talent agency in Los Angeles, and he was recently speaking and calling for the immediate removal of Netanyahu, who allowed this to happen and who endangers the lives of Israelis. And their father, Benjamin Emanuel, was a member of Irgun and was involved in the bombing of the King David Hotel. There is a third Emanuel brother who was part of Joe Biden's COVID-19 response team. Interesting. It's an interesting world when you dive in and look closely at it. And it isn't unified. So that's why that is why I caution against hate that is geared unilaterally towards a people in a region. This is a mistake. There's no agreement there. There isn't. But you have a region that has been used, that has been set up to be used for religious ends and political ends that we don't understand. And I use the word religious loosely, because we are talking about geopolitics, and immediately within less than 24 hours of the attack of the Hamas on Israel, this, what was claimed to be intelligence failure, was blamed on Iran and their involvement, their support of Hamas and their involvement. And Iran, well, it's on the list, but it is also an ancient civilization and the birthplace of many religions itself. Iran, before it was known as Iran, was Persia. And one interesting thing that has come out of Iran in the last 150 years or so, I don't have the data in my mind right now, is Baha'i. Baha'i is another religion, and it has